Seth, you're. Let's pretend for a second that you're the general manager of the Houston Texans, and you've got to take a look at three of your free agents that are, or three of your players that are in contract years heading into free agency in the offseason. Pro Football Focus had a list of the top 50 free agents. 3 Texans made the list. They're all within a few spots of each other. 35th on the list of upcoming free agents. And just to give you an idea, like number 1 is Chris Jones, the defensive tackle from Kansas City. The first, other than Chris Jones, who I don't think they're allowed to franchise tag, I think he had that negotiated in. The first 10 or 12 guys are all franchise tag, franchise tag, franchise tag. First Texan that shows up on the list at 35 is Steven Nelson, cornerback. Would you pay Steven Nelson 2 years, $14.5 million, $8.5 million guaranteed?
I would, but I don't think Steven Nelson is going to accept that that is his going rate. And I think that it ends up being, if the Texans bring Steven Nelson back, I think it'll be the rare he goes out and tests the market and then maybe comes back. There's been enough kind of acrimony between the Texans and Steven Nelson, and I think that he does have a case in that I think he's been underrated the past couple years, but he signed the contract that was available to him when he was out there as a free agent the last go around. So I think probably at his age, this is going to be the last potential for a multi-year contract he might get. So he might be thinking there's a good 3 or 4 year deal out there. So I think that I don't know if the Texans have had the conversations with him or not, but I'm guessing that he won't be happy with the number that they have in mind. And it ends up, maybe you just hope that he doesn't get so chagrined at not getting the offer he wants the first time that it bars him from coming back. Hopefully someday can work something out, the first week or two of free agency.
I feel like for sure he's testing the market. I think Steven Nelson would be. This is the best season he's had of his pro career. Yeah. I feel like it would be malpractice for him to not at least see what's out there on the marketplace. I think he's a Mulligetta guy too, if I'm not mistaken. I think he changed agents, and I think he's I may be mistaken on that, but I think he is. We know, as you pointed out, he did a lot of emoting in the offseason on social media about the situation. All right, number 2, Dalton Schultz. He's 36th on the list of top 50 free agents. The contract proposed for Dalton Schultz. And by the way, I would do that Steven Nelson deal, 2 years, $14.5 million. I would do that deal.
I would do Texans. Yeah, I just don't think he'll accept it right off the bat.
I think you're absolutely right.
I think that's actually a pretty good deal for him. For what he means to the team and what you can do elsewhere.
Yeah, he's a captain. I mean, he's one of the leaders on the team. Dalton Schultz, 3 years, $33 million, $21 million guaranteed. Basically, you're giving him the deal set that I think Dalton Schultz thought he was getting last year in free agency.
Yeah. I think that, he's really formed a nice relationship with C.J. Stroud. The blocking has become less of an issue, as honestly a lot of the route running and everything else. Dalton Schultz, I think, took a little while to on-ramp into this offense, and there were some ugly glitches early on, but once they got moving, and as John Harris pointed out, really once Laramie Tunsil got healthy and they didn't have to necessarily rely on the tight ends to help out in pass protection as much, then Dalton Schultz really got rolling. I'd be okay with that. I mean, we've seen what happens when him as well as others are out of the scheme. That he's been a really valuable asset for young C.J. Stroud.
Yeah,
and that's still less money. That 3 years, $33 million. People were rejecting last year, so I think this is a little bit more of a realistic assessment of what he probably is.
I would do it. I don't feel as strongly as I do about doing the Nelson deal at the rate that's proposed there at $7 million.
I don't. This is where I am, though. I feel like if you lose Steven Nelson, you can find another Steven Nelson. Yeah. You lose Dalton Schultz, you got 0 tight ends. So if you lose Steven Nelson, you have Derek Stingley, and then hopefully find another veteran guy or draft somebody or whatever. You lose Dalton Schultz, and you really have no tight ends that you feel good about on the roster. So you got to find another Dalton Schultz and still be down a tight end, really.
Yeah.
That's what I don't feel good about.
It's not a deep position. You're right on this team, for sure. Jonathan Grenard, this is the big one.
He's a tough one.
He's 38th on the list. I was surprised he was behind Steven Nelson and Dalton Schultz on this list because I think of the ones I would prioritize right now, Jonathan Grenard would be it. He's had the best season of these 3 guys. He just hit double digits in sacks. for the first time in his career. 3 years, $47 million, $32 million guaranteed.
I think like the surprise would come from the fact that, okay, he's been a very productive pass rusher, which is one of the two most valuable positions in sports or in the NFL, except that he has youth on his side, but he just has been so banged up and injured throughout his career that I think teams are going to get really, really nervous about giving him a big deal. Now, 3 years is pretty reasonable for a viable pass rusher who also is really good versus the run.
Yeah.
I would, if I was the three guys, man, the injuries make me so nervous with John Grenard. But I would put Dalton Schultz first, then John Grenard second, then Steven Nelson third.
Okay. I would have the two defense. Schultz would be third on my list for me. The two defensive guys.
We're at loggerheads.
We are. Well,
the vastly different opinions.
And
about this.
yeah, the Grenard would probably be one for me just because of the value of an edge rusher. Value of a guy, and he unlike the one big year he had prior to this. Because your point about the injuries is totally valid. It's what makes me pause a little bit with Grenard, especially when the first fully healthy year he's had is in his contract year. I'm not saying that he's trying harder to stay healthy or whatever. I mean, he probably is trying harder to stay healthy. I can't blame him for that in a contract year. But it's always tricky. Like when they're doing it in the most recent season, they're healthy, they're productive. Are you buying high on a guy with Grenard? I would say, though, Seth, too, with Grenard this season, unlike the one other big season he had by his standards, he had 8 sacks in 12 games back in 2021, I believe. Which, by the way, he missed 5 games that year. That was his most healthy year. He missed 5 games. That was a year where it felt like he kind of ran into a lot of sacks. Like his win, like the win rate of him on pass rushing, it seemed like he got way more sacks than somebody should get for somebody who won as infrequently as he did. He's a different guy this year. Like he is a disruptive force this season.
Yeah, he's
the
really
10 sacks matched the win rate. Yeah,
and he's created. I think I would say. He guys get sacks too.
Yes.
Just by flushing the quarterback out of the pocket.
Totally.
At times. So, yeah, I mean, I really, really like his game. I'm at this point right now where I feel just so burned by injuries in general, whether it be with first-round draft picks or guys who are currently injured right now. I start to get really, really nervous about injury history. And yet, at the same time, it's also like sometimes it's just flukish bad luck. There's so many guys that get banged up the first couple of years. Especially, you know what? I'd be curious to see if Grenard was a guy that maybe figured out some things about his body. Sometimes guys just flat out learn, how to better take care of their bodies, to be smarter about getting in the training room when they're dinged up a little bit, to nip stuff in the bud. And that would probably be a big part of it. That's a nice thing about having the institutional knowledge of the Texans. Like the Texans theoretically should have a much better feel for whether Grenard has conquered some of these injury issues, obviously not totally, but some of the injuries, compared to what the outsiders might feel about it.
John Grenard.